Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 20th. We have a huge show for you today. We're going to be going over, of course, the NCAA National Championship in college football as the Ohio State Buckeyes take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, as well as the 4 divisional round games, all of which were pretty good games. We're going to talk about each one, winners and losers, and how each one of them played out. But before we get into any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the first of our 5 topics today, that being Ohio State taking on Notre Dame in the national championship game of college football. This is one that not a lot of people saw coming. Ohio State, of course, one of the favorites entering, but this is a 7 versus 8 seed game in the first 12-team college football playoffs, which could mean a couple different things. First of all, it could mean that the seeding system is broken, right? Giving the 1 through 4 seeds to teams that won the top 4 conferences in college football. That could be indicative of what it means. You take a look at where the standings are. Ohio State and Notre Dame would have been 2 spots higher. It would have been 5 versus 6 instead of 6 versus 7. Or instead of 7 versus 8, excuse me. But this is where we're at now. The other one it could say is that it gives teams like Ohio State and Notre Dame a chance to shine at a point where they would have been eliminated. Ohio State's a really good example of that. Losing to Michigan in the final week of the season, instead of having their season be over then, they now have the chance to fight for a national title, taking out the number 1 undefeated Oregon Ducks, taking out Tennessee, a strong SEC competitor, taking out just about the toughest competition on the way through, 2 SEC teams in Texas and Tennessee, and of course they take down their Big Ten rival foe this year, the number 1 team in the nation, in the Oregon Ducks. Notre Dame, on the other end, had a little bit of an easier path. You can talk about them having a redemption arc all you want. The Week 2 loss to Northern Illinois wasn't a great loss for them, but they haven't lost another game since, and they've really turned the corner, right? This team has been playing amazing. They beat Indiana pretty handily. They take care of business against Boise State. They take care of business against Penn State, right? They beat the teams that they're supposed to beat. And then Penn State was just a really good game, especially defensively from them. And it shows everything that Notre Dame is about, right? These 2 teams are both deserving of winning a national title. And for people that are trying to argue not, I just don't understand it. You don't have to be perfect to be a national championship in any sport. If it was, we already would have crowned Oregon, right? They went perfect in the regular season. They won the Big Ten title game, and they didn't lose a game in the regular season. They ended up getting killed by this Ohio State team, a team that they beat by 1 earlier on in the season. But this game should be really good. Ohio State comes in as huge favorites, favorited by 9 points by the books. You can find them at a lot of places. The over-under set at 45.5. But this is a game that, when you look on paper, there's a reason that Ohio State is as favored as it is, right? They are super, super lopsided on paper. You go just about down every single position battle, and Ohio State is going to win it, right? You go and look at the quarterbacks. You have Will Howard versus Riley Leonard, right? These 2 guys both transferred into these programs after last year. Riley Leonard coming over from Duke. He's been really good this season. He's a guy that, as a quarterback, as a leader, isn't going to be able to throw for 300 yards in a game, isn't going to throw for 4 touchdowns, but what he does do is he adds a dual threat on the ground. He's one of the best running quarterbacks in the nation. That's not to say he can't throw the ball either. He's been able to sling it a little bit. We saw it in the Penn State game, hitting a couple of clutch throws down the sideline, some beautiful placement that if it were anywhere else, it would have been intercepted. And he was the better quarterback in that game over Drew Aller, who a lot of guys thought could have been the best quarterback in this year's or next year's draft, an NFL's kind of guy. Riley Leonard outdueled him at the quarterback position just by throwing the ball. That's not including what he did with his legs, which was incredibly impressive as well. Will Howard, on the other end, is more of that pocket passer kind of guy. He's got a little bit of athleticism in him. He can scramble a bit, but Will Howard is a guy that as long as he is comfortable in the pocket, it's going to be a long night for the defense on the other end, right? Will Howard is a very good thrower of the football. He's done amazingly in the playoffs, especially avoiding mistakes. He's a guy that in the past has been someone that is prone to making some bad decisions, prone to throwing some interceptions, and we saw it shine a little bit in the Texas game, but he was able to regain his composure, play good football, find his weapons, find the guys that were open, not just lock in on a guy like Jeremiah Smith when he was getting double and triple covered, which was a really good sign that this Ohio State team is led by a very good quarterback. Will Howard is a guy that I think when you compare him to Riley Leonard, they're very different quarterbacks, and they're both good. They're both good college quarterbacks, but I think I'm giving the advantage on this one to Ohio State and Will Howard. I think he's just a better quarterback right now, despite everything that Riley Leonard can do. The running back position is very interesting because you have two really good running backs in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins for Ohio State. On one end, both of them are amazing. They're both dual threat guys coming out of the backfield in passing situations you don't want to see. They can be home run hitters at any moment. But on the Notre Dame side, you have Jeremiah Love. And Jeremiah Love is one of the best running backs in the nation. He's been playing on a bum knee basically all playoffs. He's supposedly 100% healthy. We'll see how that goes in the game. But Notre Dame is going to need him and his big playability, especially against a tough Ohio State run defense. He is going to be the one spot where I think he's the best running back. Now, if you go running back backfields, I think Ohio State has the advantage because you take two really good running backs in Judkins and Henderson as opposed to two good running backs over there in Notre Dame. But Jeremiah Love, I think, is the best running back out of all three of them. It's a tough battle there. Again, on paper, it goes to Ohio State again. All these guys do very different things good. They're very good pass catcher backs, those two at Ohio State. And Jeremiah Love can catch it a bit, but he's more of a bruiser, your traditional running back, running it between the tackles, breaking out those big runs. He is going to be a huge part if Notre Dame wants to stay in this game and wants to continue to be competitive with this Ohio State team. Now, at wide receiver, it's not nearly as close as that last two positions. Ohio State, wide receiver U, some people might say. They're in a battle there with LSU for that one, but they are dominant at that wide receiver position, potentially one of the best wide receivers in the entire nation at just 17 years old, Jeremiah Smith. You have Emeka Egbuka, and you have Carnell Tate, who had a huge game when both of those guys were seeing a lot of different coverages against Texas. These guys are just flat out better than Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame's corners against Penn State's receivers, not at the same level, held them to 0 catches. So that is something that is a matchup to keep an eye on. It's going to be near impossible to do that to the wide receivers at Ohio State. That offense is just completely different than the one that Penn State runs. They're running it through their wide receivers a lot more than wide receivers being a byproduct of the offense like at Penn State. In this one, I'm curious how they're going to handle Jeremiah Smith. We talked about how Texas shut down Jeremiah Smith, holding him to 1 reception for 3 yards, but they had 3 or 4 guys on him at all time. Emeka Egbuka over there, they had double coverage on, which left guys like Carnell Tate wide open over the middle, and he feasted. He had a huge game, keeping them in the game. That's what they needed him to do. I'm curious how Notre Dame is going to handle this, because they have a very good defense too. Obviously, we saw how good their corners are. They're very opportunistic, especially in the secondary. You don't want to let them get those turnovers. You need to play smart football if you're Will Howard, but those wide receivers versus the corners are going to be the matchup that I'm watching the most tonight, at least when Ohio State is on offense. Now, talking a little bit more about the defenses, both of these defenses are some of the best in college football, right? Ohio State, one of the best in all of the nation. Same thing with Notre Dame. What they do great is just about everything, right? We just finished talking about the corners of Notre Dame, but their pass rush is crazy too. They were able to get a lot of pressure on every single quarterback that they faced, putting them under duress, especially in that Georgia game, leading to turnovers, which is what Notre Dame thrives on defensively. If Ohio State can play clean football, if they can hold up in protection just a little bit against those speed rushers of Notre Dame, I give them a pretty good shot to win. But Notre Dame's defense is going to make this a tough one. They're going to keep it close, and Ohio State's offense, which has been dominant against just about everybody, in the playoffs all year long, is going to not be as dominant in this one. We saw Texas start to slow them down. I think Notre Dame learns a little bit from their game plan and improves on it a bit and is able to slow them down even a little bit more. But that Ohio State defense is nothing to scoff at either. They have one of the best run defenses in the country, which is what Notre Dame is really good at. You can attack them at their corners. The corners are still pretty good, but I'd say if you're going to beat this Ohio State team, you need to be able to air it out. And I think that's just not going to happen with this Notre Dame team. I think Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard are going to be able to keep it close with their ground game, but it's not going to be enough against this Ohio State defense that is just amazing in just about every single possible way you slice it. This game should be good. It should be close. I think it's going to be a defensive battle, lots of sacks, kind of a slow start to the game, which has not been Ohio State's MO. They can kind of get a little bit out of sorts if they don't get up to those quick starts like they have all playoffs long, and they can get a little bit non-aggressive. They need to stay aggressive against this Notre Dame defense, but I think Ohio State just has too many advantages at the end of the day. This game will be closer than 9 points, but I just can't see Ohio State losing to Notre Dame. I have Ohio State winning this game 28-24. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game in the comments. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we tip our toes into the NFL. We break down the huge upset that took place last weekend on Saturday night between the Commanders and the Detroit Lions. We'll talk about that and much more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 20th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Ohio State versus Notre Dame National Championship game that is taking place right now as we speak. In this segment, we turn our attention to the National Football League. 4 games took place this weekend. 4 games turned out to be really entertaining. We're going to talk about all 4 of them. We're going to start off with the huge upset of the week. The Washington Commanders traveled to Detroit to take on the Lions, the 15-2 Lions, and they beat them at their own game. We're going to talk about that game in just a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the NFL here just a little bit. The Washington Commanders take on the Detroit Lions as 9.5-point dogs, and they end up winning by 14 points. They put up 45 points on that Lions defense, winning 45-31. A huge game for them as they advanced to the NFC Championship game for the first time since 1991, the year that they won their last Super Bowl. This is a huge accomplishment for this Washington Commanders team, and we're going to start off at the top with the quarterback position. Jayden Daniels continues to amaze, continues to wow, and continues to put up what could be the best rookie quarterback season in the history of the NFL. Jayden Daniels has cemented his legacy as a Commanders legend for this run in his rookie season. He already has put himself in the record books as just the 6th rookie quarterback to ever lead his team to the either the AFC or the NFC championship game. This is huge because every other quarterback that has done it, that being, Big Ben, Mark Sanchez, Brock Purdy, Joe Flacco, and Sean King, all of those guys had top 3 defenses in the NFL, and clearly this Washington Commanders team does not have a top 3 scoring defense in the NFL. They have the 18th scoring defense in the NFL. That is not great. That's a bottom half defense in the league, and it really showed in this game. Although I will give a lot of credit to that Washington defense for keeping them in the game in this one because they played a huge role in that, right? What they were able to do, forcing 5 turnovers in a game where they needed it, only winning by 14 points, those 5 turnovers paid huge dividends, including 1 pick six by Quan Martin, the safety. That was a massive, massive game by this Washington defense. One that had not been particularly great at forcing turnovers all season long. Now, they hadn't been the worst at it, but they hadn't been great. Mike Sanderstill, rookie out of Michigan, with 2 interceptions in this one of Jared Goff, one of Jameson Williams on not the best trick play that Ben Johnson has ever drawn up. Still, though, this was an incredible accomplishment for this team and Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels puts up near 300 yards through the air, putting up potentially the best quarterback day of all 8 quarterbacks that participated in the divisional round of the NFL. 22 for 31, 299 yards, and 2 touchdowns through the air, adding 51 yards on the ground on 16 carries. That was just a dominant effort. Terry McLaurin had almost 100 yards and a touchdown, taking one to the house, 60 yards on a long screen pass, breaking tackles, getting past that secondary that already was a little depleted, but got even more depleted in this game. One of the reasons the Lions ended up losing this game the way they did is not just the fact that Jayden Daniels and that Washington Commanders offense is a really good unit, but it's also the fact that coming into it, they were incredibly injured. They got one of their corners back in Terrion Arnold, but then they lost 3 other corners over the course of that game, including Amik Robertson, who had shut down Justin Jefferson the last time they were out. That's a huge loss for them on an already well-depleted defense. That's just not something that can happen, and they continue to win. So a lot of blame can be put on a lot of different things for the Lions, but one of the things that people need to understand when we talk about why this 15-2 Lions team was not able to get past the divisional round, why as the number 1 seed they were not able to win a playoff game, is you have to look at the amount of injuries that they were dealing with. Half of their defense was just backups. That is not normal. That is not okay, and that's not something that you feel confident about heading in. We knew this game was going to be a shootout. We didn't know that the entire shootout would happen in the second quarter. 42 points scored in the second quarter of this game. That is the most points scored in a quarter in the history of the National Football League playoffs, right? That is insane what they were able to do back to back to back to back. The defenses started to show up. The offenses maybe got tired after halftime. The adjustments were made, but still, this game got flipped on its head in the second quarter, and really one of the key moments in this game, of course there were a couple, aside from the pick six that Jared Goff threw, was in the 2-minute drill. Jared Goff and the Lions are driving. They're down by 10 at this point to the Washington Commanders. They're looking to make it a one-possession game heading into halftime. They get past the 50-yard line. They're in Jake Bates' field goal range, and Jared Goff throws a pass over the middle that is picked off by Mike Sanderstill in the end zone. That was a awesome play by him, undercutting the deep post route, one that a lot of other times would have worked for Jared Goff on the Lions. That was an amazing defensive play over there, one where offensive linemen thought it was a touchdown, turning around, doing the early touchdown celebration. Instead, it goes the other way, and instead of potentially 3 or even 7 points being put up on that drive by the Lions, it's no points, and it's a 10-point lead heading into halftime for the Washington Commanders. The Commanders then got the ball first, went down the field, and put up more points. They continued to expand the lead when they needed to, and that offense played amazing. But I want to give props to the Washington defense. All the trash, all the vitriol that I have put out there for this Washington defense, saying it's not very good, it's not necessarily wrong, but they showed up when they needed to, and they forced 5 huge turnovers, 2 of them in minus territory, in their own defensive backfield, one of them in the red zone. That is how you play winning football. That is how you advance to these games, and that is how you get to that's how you get to the NFC Championship game. It is just incredible to see how far this team has gotten, and it's not just Jaden Daniels. Bobby Wagner, Austin Eckler had huge games in this one. I brought up the other rookie, Mike Sanderstill, who had a huge game in this one. Terry McLaurin, finally with a quarterback, has a huge game in this one. De'Ami Brown leads his team in receiving with 98 yards, a guy that was taken ahead of Amon-Ra in that draft, one of those receivers that's on his list that he looks at every single day of receivers taken ahead of him, had a huge day to help put away the Lions. That was just a masterclass of a football game by the Washington Commanders, by that coaching staff, and they have advanced to the NFC Championship game for the first time since 1991, under a new name, under new ownership, and it's just been really cool to see how far this team has come, even from just last year, but really over their last 20 years. It's a really cool story, and it's really, really fun to watch. So we'll see what happens when they take on the Eagles at 3 o'clock on Sunday. But a third time playing a division opponent, they've got a shot in this one. We'll see. But let me know what you thought of this game. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, the game of the year between the top 2 MVP candidates, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, and Josh Allen and the Bills, came down to the wire, came down to a 2-point conversion. We're going to talk about how we got there in that game and what went wrong for the Baltimore Ravens as they lost to the Bills 27-25. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 20th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Washington Commanders' defeat of the Detroit Lions on the road in Detroit, taking down the number 1 seed in the NFC. In this segment, we turn our attention to the AFC Sunday night battle. The 2-seed Bills, toasted the 3-seed Ravens in a battle that could have been the game of the year. Ended at 27-25 and came down to a 2-point conversion. We're going to talk about everything that happened in that game and much more. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the second big game of this week between the Bills and the Ravens. This one was everything it lived up to. Maybe not the offensive explosion that some people expected it to be, but this game was amazing. It came down to a 2-point conversion. All the drama you could have wanted and hoped for in a game like this, it delivered. And it came down, like I said, to one play to tie, potentially send the game to overtime, or send the Ravens home. And it didn't go the way that the Ravens wanted to, right? Obviously, the Bills walk out of this one with a 2-point victory, but we're going to back it up just a couple steps. How did we get here? How did we get to the point where Mark Andrews has a chance to score this 2-point conversion and potentially send this game to overtime? Now, to keep this in mind, it's not revisionist history if he catches that ball and gets in. They go to overtime. There's still a minute 33 remaining in this game. Josh Allen could have found a way to drive down the field. Buffalo still had two or three timeouts left, and they still had time to drive down the field. So that's not the end-all, be-all of the game, but let's say that it is. Let's say that would have sent the game to overtime. How did we get here? First of all, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about how it started, right? The Ravens get the ball first. They drive down the field, and they score a touchdown, looking good on their opening drive. Buffalo then answers in kind, right? They go out, they get a field goal. They look pretty good as well. Then the offense, it slows down just a little bit. Josh Allen ends up rushing a touchdown, gets 2 on the day with his legs. None through the air for him, though, so his numbers through the air just look a little pedestrian. He ended up having a very good game, but entering halftime, the Bills had a 21 The Bills had a 21. The Bills had an 11-point lead at halftime. Apologize for that. The Bills had an 11-point lead at halftime heading into it, and this was the largest lead that the Ravens have ever had to deal with all season long, at halftime at least. They've come back from major deficits in the past in this season. They've been very good at that, coming back 5 or 6 times this season from double-digit points. But down halftime, this is not a position that they're used to being. They were able to crawl all the way back in this one. They were able to crawl all the way back to a point where at 21-19, they have the opportunity to go for 2. At that point, they do. And this is where you can start to question things. I was watching this game with a bunch of different people, right? And I was in the mindset, of course, of what the Bills were thinking. Go for 2. A lot of people were also in the mindset of go for 1. And obviously, revisionist history should have just kicked the extra point, right? You had a chance instead of having to go for 2 at the end there, which maybe they would have done anyway. You could just kick the field goal, kick the extra point, and tie the game at 27. Instead, they go for 2 there, a decision that I think was the right one, didn't end up being the right one, but it seemed like the right one at the time. A lot of times in the past, in those situations, you would have just kicked the extra point, gone down by 1, and attempted to trust your defense. Your defense did a very good job, of course, holding the Bills to just 2 field goals down the stretch in that game, shutting them down basically in that second half, which is really, really tough to do, especially against Josh Allen. The way that they'd been able to run the ball all game was really impressive, but they were able to slow them down. Their defense did the job. No turnovers, but that's fine. Holding them to field goals gave them the chance at the end of that game to drive down the field. Lamar Jackson, who hadn't had the best game in the early parts of the first half, he threw a really bad interception. He fumbled on a play that just was broken from the start, a high snap that he tipped up, caught, and tried to make something out of, something that he'd done multiple times throughout the regular season. He was unable to make something happen. Instead, he fumbles it, scooped up by Von Miller, and he's able to rumble his way almost to the end zone, almost scoring a touchdown for Von Miller, taking it down inside the red zone where the Bills eventually scored a touchdown. So that's not the way that you want it to go, right? That's not the way that the Ravens planned it, losing those two turnovers in the first half. And then, of course, we get to Mark Andrews. He has been the big story in this game, right? And I want to preface this by saying it's not his fault. This game is not his fault. The Ravens had 3 turnovers in this game. 2 of them we just talked about with Lamar Jackson. The other one was from Mark Andrews there. And Mark Andrews gets the ball punched out in a point where halfway through the third quarter, they were driving, attempting to get back into the game. At the end of the day, they were able to get back into the game. That turnover, well, it mattered. It didn't matter as much as it seemed to have mattered. And the Ravens, with 3 turnovers and getting none of your own, it's tough. It's tough to win a game. So I applaud them. I really do, for being able to even come back and make it a game after what they did on offense in the first half and that other fumble, that catastrophic fumble in the third quarter. But at the end of the day, Mark Andrews also had that drop in the end zone. So there's a lot of stuff that you can point out and are very obvious, but there's a couple other things that I think led to the Ravens losing it. Obviously, that turnover margin is brutal. -3. No team has ever won a playoff game with a -3 playoff margin. Not a single team has ever done it. In fact, Buffalo has been really good in the playoffs at forcing turnovers. In 21 straight games in the playoffs, they have won the turnover battle. Now, obviously, they haven't won all of those games, but that's 21 straight games that they've done that. That is incredibly impressive, and their defense really did step up in this one. That was one of the big concerns I had with this. The defense, the run defense especially in the first half, they did a great job of shutting down Derrick Henry, of not letting Lamar Jackson escape out of the pocket, of not letting these guys break these big runs and let them go down the sideline, right? They did a great job, but that's something I want to point out here. The Ravens only gave the ball to Derrick Henry 16 times. And when we talk about the Ravens last year in the playoffs, when we talk about what's been successful for the Ravens all season long, when we talk about what the Ravens needed to do to win this game, it was feed the ball to Derrick Henry. Give him at least 20 carries in this one. Let him be the focal point of your offense. Lamar Jackson was able to connect with guys downfield. He was able to make a ton of big plays, and he did a very good job in this game of keeping them in it. But when the Ravens give the ball to Derrick Henry 20 or more times, they are undefeated. 9-0 this season when they give him the ball 20 times on the ground. Instead, they only give it to him 16 times. He's 16 for 84, which is still a pretty good yards per carry average, somewhere sitting around just over 5 yards a carry with that average. That is really, really good. And they just don't feed him. This is something that hurt the Ravens in last year's playoffs against the Chiefs. They got away from the run game. They ended up losing that game by just 7. And you can point to a lot of different things in that one, but they didn't run the ball. Against the Chiefs early on in the season, and really in every game that they've lost this season, they get away from running the ball. They need to run the ball. They need to stick with their identity. They need to give the ball to their bruiser, Derrick Henry. Keep him in the game. Keep him running. Keep him churning. Just give him the ball. And again, that's one of the factors that led to a loss. Really, the big one is turnovers. Turnovers bad, but that's not the overarching theme of this, right? The other thing is they didn't have Zay Flowers. So it let that Bills defense play a lot more aggressively than they would have otherwise. Zay Flowers is by far the best receiver on that team. This is a team that was led by tight ends in receiving, with Isaiah Likely scoring a touchdown down the stretch, leading the team in receiving yards. Rashad Bateman had a couple of deep plays, but they don't really have that true wide receiver one kind of weapon without Zay Flowers. When he's out there, it's tough to blitz and play man because he's so fast. He's like a natural man beater when he's running these crossing routes across the field. You have to play zone. You have to play a little bit more zone, a little bit less man, and it's hard to blitz like that. They went hard at Lamar Jackson. They were going hard at Derrick Henry, and they did everything that they could to force the ball out of Derrick Henry's hands. And again, props to that Bills defense. They stepped up when they needed to. They played a great game. But I think that the Ravens just got a little bit out of their game plan, not having Zay Flowers, not giving the ball to Derrick Henry. And because of that and everything else that happened in that game, they fell just short. It was a good game. It was a great game. And now Josh Allen and the Bills are on to Kansas City for redemption. They tend to beat them in the regular season, but they have yet to take them out in the playoffs. That one should be a good game. But the Bills and their defense were amazing. The Ravens shot themselves in the foot one too many times in this game. But let me know what you thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the other game from Sunday, the snow game. The Rams kept it close, almost were able to pull off a crazy comeback against the Philadelphia Eagles. Instead, they are getting sent home and the Eagles are moving on. We'll talk about that game coming up here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
This podcast available anywhere. Go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 20th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the two night games, the Saturday and Sunday night games between the Commanders and the Lions, and the Bills and the Ravens. That's how the Bills and Commanders move on to their respective championship games. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NFC Challenger, the Eagles. They took down the Rams in a snow game where Saquon Barkley ran wild and the Rams almost led an incredible comeback against a stout Eagles defense. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the third of our 4 NFL games that took place last weekend as the Rams' comeback effort fell just short against a stout Eagles defense. And before we get into that Rams comeback effort, which really was not something I was expecting after the way that game started and was going, especially in the snow, I want to talk a little bit about the star of the game, the star of the show, and the Rams slayer, Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley must love playing against these Los Angeles Rams. No one else on the Eagles seemed to have too fun of a time playing them when they were on offense, at least. But Saquon Barkley, he loves playing this team. If you remember in the regular season, he went wild. 255 yards on the ground and 2 long touchdowns, adding adding 47 yards through the air to get to 302 scrimmage yards. In this game, he wasn't quite as good. You can't expect him to repeat that performance. He only ran for 200 yards and 2 long touchdowns while adding 27 through the air. Not quite 300 scrimmage yards, only about 230. So, the Rams did a good job of bottling him up. He was amazing yet again. Saquon Barkley has been the lifeblood of this Eagles team all playoffs long, and it wasn't just Saquon. Jalen Hurts, who didn't have his best game through the air. There is no doubt about it. You can't sit there and tell me that Jalen Hurts, if he put this effort in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, against the Bills, or in the NFC Championship game against a high-powered Commanders offense, that you would be very happy with it. Did amazing on the ground. Adds 70 yards and opens the scoring with a 40-yard touchdown run in the beginning, right? He had a huge day on the ground, but this is not all flowers, roses, and butterflies for this Eagles team, for this Eagles offense. There were plenty of concerns. Again, Saquon Barkley ran wild, and that's what you can expect him to do because he's just a very special player having a very special season. And it's a shame that he's not going to get too many awards for it. He's probably going to get Offensive Player of the Year, but in the MVP conversation, you just lose out to quarterbacks. That's all in the past, though. Saquon keeping this team alive, and you could tell he was ready. He was locked in for this game. He wanted to prove something. He wanted to win, and he did. But that Eagles offensive line and Jalen Hurts, there are concerns there. They gave up 7 sacks in this one. The Rams have been eliminated, but in just 2 games. They have put themselves up near the top of history books that defensive line has. 16 sacks in 2 games is third in NFL history. And if you go on a per game basis in a playoff run, that is the most sacks per game in a playoff run in the history of the NFL. 8 sacks per game over a 2-game stretch. The 2 teams ahead of them played 3 games each. They were at 19 and 18 sacks. And if the Rams played again, I bet they would have broken that record. This unit, that defensive line unit, even playing a little bit shorthanded as Fisk went down early in this game, they were amazing. They kept this team in the game, both literally and on the scoreboard, right? Adding a safety to make this game close. You had a couple of missed extra points by Jake Elliott and a safety by that Rams unit. It puts them in the chance where down 6, they're able to try and complete this comeback effort. They kept them in this game. That defense was really good. The wide receivers and Jalen Hurts need to start figuring something out because Jalen Hurts only 128 yards through the air. Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown also, again, did not have very good games. That's 2 straight games. They just were not super reliable or super productive. And a lot of that falls on Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, again, has not had his best playoffs. He's not rusty in this one because, again, what he was able to do on the ground kept them in the game, and he probably won the game for them with his legs, but he wasn't able to do it through the air, and they're going to need to figure that out because they're a very one-dimensional offense right now. Right now, it's going to be really hard to take out anybody left in the NFL with the way that Jalen Hurts is playing. They need to figure that out, and they need to figure that out soon, but that Eagles defense is amazing. That Eagles defense is the best in the league. We just finished talking about the Rams being able to put pressure, but that Eagles defense wasn't too shabby themselves, right? 5 sacks on the day for themselves. Pretty good. Not going to complain about that one, right? What they were able to do in that game. What they were able to do against Matthew Stafford, despite him slinging it all over the field, was incredible. No turnovers were forced in this one. It was a very clean game in the snow again. But it was crazy. Jalen Carter, 2 sacks in this one, 3 solo tackles. He was amazing. He is just a monster on the inside, and he is eating everybody up that comes at him. How about Isaiah Rodgers coming in, stepping up in this game after Darius Slay goes down with injury and shutting down, coming up with a couple big plays. 2 passes deflected in this one, couple big ones down the stretch. He's a guy that stepped up huge for the Eagles, and that Eagles defense is just super talented. They lose Nakobe Dean, who's one of the best linebackers in football right now. He goes down. Doesn't matter. You still have Zach Bond, who's an all-pro level guy. You still have all these guys on the outside and on the inside that are able to make up for his production that they have lost there. That is incredibly impressive, and it's a trait that only the elite teams in the NFL have. It's not an easy thing. It really isn't. But in the closing moments of this one, Matthew Stafford made it a game. He did. They were able to drive down the field after Saquon Barkley broke a 78-yard touchdown run to seemingly close the game. I thought the game was over after Saquon Barkley broke out that run. I just didn't see the way the Rams, who had 3 drops heading into that drive in the snow and were struggling a little bit, were going to find a way to win this game. Instead, they completely turn it on. They figure out how to move the ball against this Eagles defense. Puka Nacua with some incredible catches, a beautiful shoulder catch down the sideline where he could not see the ball. The ball was past his helmet, pins it to his shoulder, gets 2 feet down. Beautiful throw and catch by Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua. That is why they're one of the best duos in all of the NFL. Cooper Kupp shows up huge in this game as well. 84 yards for him on 6 receptions. He had a big day, wasn't able to get into the end zone, but at the end of the day, this comeback effort falls just short. 4th and 10, they get all the way down to the red zone. Matthew Stafford takes a sack on 3rd down and 2. And then he throws the ball just wide for Puka Nacua on an out route. Game is over. That was an incredible game. It went the distance. It was everything we could have asked for, and both of these teams played great football in the snow. Snow games are special. They always are. This is one of those weird snow games where it wasn't snowy at first, it got really snowy in the middle, and then they were able to throw the ball at the end, right? It was one of those where you had a little bit of everything, and it was just really fun to watch. Saquon Barkley had a day, player of the game, keeping the Eagles in it in both of their first 2 rounds of the playoffs. Saquon Barkley is amazing. He needs more credit than he's already getting. There's not enough credit in the world for him to get. Give him more flowers. Give him more credit. He's great at football. The Eagles move on to take on the Washington Commanders a third time, round 3 in the NFC East between the Commanders and the Eagles, coming up 3 p.m. on Sunday. Cannot wait to see how that one goes, but let me know what your thoughts were of this game in the comments. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we finish off our show talking about the final game of the NFL divisional round as the Kansas City Chiefs advance to their 7th straight AFC championship game, something that's only been done one other time in the history of football, and I bet you can guess by who. We'll talk about that coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 20th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the 3rd NFL game, the snow game between the Rams and the Eagles. In this segment, we turn our attention to the final game of the NFL divisional round, the kickoff one, as the Chiefs advance to their 7th straight AFC championship game versus the Texans, taking them out 23-14. But before we get into that game, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our fifth and final segment of the show here today. The Chiefs, of course, dominate once again and make it to their seventh straight AFC championship game. Every single year that Patrick Mahomes has been the starting quarterback, they have made it at least this far. This is a record that is only beaten by 8 straight years of Tom Brady and the Patriots dynasty making it to those AFC championship games, and it doesn't seem like Patrick Mahomes is going to stop at 7. Now that is speculating for the future here, and we're here to talk about the present. The past, the present, the recent, and the now, right? Let's talk about this Texans versus Chiefs game that saw the Chiefs advance. They win 23-14. And there's a couple of takeaways from this game. First one, of course, was the issues with the refs. And we're going to save that for the end because that's a whole nother issue. And that's something that we'll talk about after everything that happened in this football game. In this one, it started off bad immediately for the Texans, right? They kick it off, normal kickoff, instead returned 70 yards and a penalty. The Chiefs start this game off after a month off of football at the 13-yard line of the Houston Texans. Now, credit to the Houston Texans defense in this one, not just on that drive where they forced a field goal, but really throughout this whole game. This Houston Texans defense had to deal with a lot. Some short fields due to missed field goals, due to fourth down turnovers, due to bad special teams plays, right? They had to deal with a lot of not great circumstances, and they did their best. They had a lot of sacks in this one. They did everything they needed to. They got pressure on Patrick Mahomes, making him uncomfortable in the pocket, and sometimes it just didn't matter. On plays where any other quarterback would have gone down, would have taken a sack, would have thrown an incomplete pass, maybe even an interception, Patrick Mahomes goes out there and makes amazing plays. So I want to give him his credit first before we talk about some of those weird penalty calls, because Patrick Mahomes made one of those Patrick Mahomes plays again, right? Getting his feet taken out from under him, he kind of falls forward at like a 45-degree angle, similar to what Joe Burrow did earlier this season in Week 18. But in this one, he doesn't bend his knees. He locks his knees, which is something Patrick Mahomes doesn't get enough credit for. His awareness of his entire body. When he's falling to the ground, how he keeps his entire body up off the ground for longer than any other quarterback. Other quarterbacks would keep their knees bent. Patrick Mahomes takes that extra second to lock his knees, give him the time he needs to wind up, throw that ball, find Travis Kelce in the end zone for a touchdown as he is falling face first onto the turf. That is incredible. That is a beautiful play, and that is why Patrick Mahomes is one of the best, if not the best quarterback in all of NFL history. He's the best quarterback right now in the league, of course. No one is arguing that. But Travis Kelce had set history of his own. He is now the all-time leader in the playoffs of anybody ever, not just tight ends, of any receiver for 100-yard receiving games in the playoffs. He is first or second on every single major metric with Jerry Rice. What he's been able to do in his career in the playoffs is incredible. Travis Kelce, really, this was one of the more quiet 100-yard games. It was one of those break a big play and then not do much else. Ends up catching a touchdown, of course, on that crazy play by Patrick Mahomes. But this was just a classic Kansas City game, right? You trust the defense to shut down this Texans offense, and they did. That Texans offense was in a bind all game long. It wasn't just their offense, their special teams was really struggling. Kaimi Fairbairn, a usually reliable kicker, went 2 for 4 with a blocked kick and a missed kick, and missed his only attempt at an extra point. That's 7 points left on the board. Would not have mattered. They still would have ended up losing this game, even with that cheap safety that the Chiefs gave them at the end of it. They still would not have ended up winning that game. So you can talk about all you want. The Texans did not deserve to win this game. They were really, really bad with sacks. They took 8 sacks in this one. They lost 58 yards on those sacks, and they were super undisciplined. They took a lot of penalties, 84 yards in penalties compared to the Chiefs just one for excuse me. The Chiefs took a lot less penalties in this game. They were a lot more disciplined. That's how you win football games. We talk about luck. We talk about, it's rigged a lot of times. And there were some bad calls on the Texans, no doubt about it. 30 of those penalty yards were kind of not great. They were Patrick Mahomes doing Patrick Mahomes things, but still 54 yards in penalties and 58 yards in sacks. That's over 100 negative yards that you just don't see on the box score. That is bad. That is not okay. And the Chiefs win the game because of that. You can say it's devil magic. You can say it's rigged. You can say the refs are playing for the Chiefs or whatever you want. But at the end of the day, the Chiefs are just a really good football team. And really good football teams are going to make these situations happen more often than bad football teams because they're playing disciplined. They're playing smart. They're playing clean, and they're playing good football. They're not letting you put a chip in their armor by shooting themselves in the foot, right? They're not putting themselves in these situations where they have the ability to lose the game. They are playing winning football, and that is why the Chiefs always win these tight games. And that's fine. That is good coaching, that is good discipline, and that is a good football team. Now, getting to these calls a little bit, because they were bad, right? For lack of a better term, they were awful. These two calls, of course, in question, the roughing the passer call and the unnecessary roughness call, both on Patrick Mahomes, were not very good calls. Patrick Mahomes does this all the time, and it's one of these things that is just a part of the rule in football, right? By the letter of the law, those things were penalties. So the refs can hide behind that all they want. But you hit him on the shoulder, barely clip his helmet, you call that roughing the passer? I don't like that, right? He runs around, kind of stops and starts. Patrick Mahomes looks like he's going to slide, doesn't, takes a step, and then at the last second decides, I'm not getting any more yards, I'm going to go down, and then gets himself barely clipped in the helmet. Keeps his head up on these, by the way. That's one of the things, too. A lot of other quarterbacks will duck their head down, will stay down, or at least won't juke around like that. A lot of other quarterbacks will try and duck their head out of the way. Patrick Mahomes keeps his head up. He wants to draw these penalties. One of the best examples of it, I think, was in this game as well. On a scramble down the sideline, he runs basically face first into Kamari Lassiter. And the rookie corner, Kamari Lassiter, does something really smart that I don't see happen too often. He just kind of body blocks him. He's saying, I'm not getting another penalty. I'm just going to stand in front of you, and you're not going to be able to get past me. Patrick Mahomes does this all the time, where he gets to the sideline, people don't want to hit him, and he scrambles for 5, 6, 7 more yards, sometimes even 15 more yards if he's able to keep himself in bounds that long. Now, he gets hit. Patrick Mahomes kind of stops. They look at each other, and then a teammate of Kamari Lassiter comes across and hits Patrick Mahomes while he has 2 feet planted firmly in bounds. Wasn't too hard of a hit. It was a big push. He was coming over from a little bit, but he wasn't out of bounds. He was in bounds, and Patrick Mahomes does a performatory flop, right? He does this extra motion, gets on the ground, tries to ask for a penalty. And that's the kind of thing that I think gets people annoyed, right? By the letter of the law, these things were penalties, right? So I'm not going to sit here and get on my high horse and be like, the refs are doing special treatment for Patrick Mahomes. But the rule does need to change a little bit. There does need to be some protection for defenders because there aren't anything. This is a league that, and especially these rules protecting quarterbacks, are designed to hurt defenders. These rules make it near impossible for defenders to hit quarterbacks. They do. And I think they just need to change it a little bit. Look, you need to be able to review these. If a runner is going down late, and it doesn't have to be like a challengeable review, but New York goes to review all the time and says, hey, maybe we'll make an immediate change. If a runner is dancing around, kind of comes to a full stop, and then at the last second decides to duck down, you need to be able to differentiate that from, an actual headhunting call, from an actual call where it was unnecessary roughness. And you can tell the difference. If every fan in the world can see that it was kind of a not great call, and everyone can agree, that the announcers can agree, and even the analysts can say, I don't know, it technically is, and that's your best defense. It's not a great look. And again, the Chiefs are great. The Chiefs are great at football, and some of those calls are going to go their way because they're great at football, because they put themselves in these situations to get those calls, right? But the rule needs to tweak itself a little bit. It's not a bad rule. It's good to protect the quarterback. It's good to protect these defenseless runners and these defenseless receivers and everything like that. But you need to be able to tell when it is a real unnecessary roughness and when it's just a technical unnecessary roughness, if that makes sense. Those are my 2 cents on it. But the Chiefs advanced to their 7th straight AFC Championship game, and they played great. They really did. They deserve it. They are now taking on the Bills in a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes playoff rematch. Should be a lot of fun. That is the Sunday night game. Cannot wait to see. Let me know what your thoughts were in this game. I'd love to hear them. And thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place, going over everything that happens in the world of sports, whether that be the national championship game or coaches being hired. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Y'all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.